things do happen, and I can't predict it. I never know what night it's going to be. So just be aware, just in case.
Very excited, bitches. Very excited. Keep cashing to a minimum and warn everyone. I can't believe we didn't get on film that when he came out of the shower earlier, he was on Mum rang him. We made him say, "You have to speak up. I'm wearing a towel." Classic Simpsons. She's doing the crosswords. I don't usually look on the crosswords. Yeah. Look at vintage.
Okay, we've begun the ghost tour of Penzance.
Yay!
Yay!
Yeah, I'm really hoping for pirates.
Pirate ghosts.
I'm wearing a pirate jacket.
I'm in a military jacket, but it can be cancelled.
Mine is actually a pirate jacket.
Is that?
Yeah. It's a pirate cut shape. Military, admirals.
Ooh, we're going down here.
Right, first place tonight is Abbey Street, which is that street, the car at the top of it. You see, I arranged that to be there just to provide a moment. Abbey Street is a place with a lot of history. It goes back a long way, and perhaps it's most famous for the fact that if you go back a few hundred years, and for many years before that, that was actually part of the main route through the town. Some would say it is a very busy place in respect of what we're here for tonight. Ghostly goings on, strange experiences, etc. Now, there's a very good reason why we've not gone straight there, and that is because I'm going to tell you three main stories. One of them begins at this end of the street, so just where we're going to walk once we go from here. So there are actually a lot of different stories as such relating to Abbey Street. And a lot of them are just, sudden drops in temperature and maybe the odd strange noise and feelings and stuff like that. That's not what I'm going to concentrate on tonight. Also, some of the stories that we've heard of previously, how do I put it? There's not a lot of consistency. Some of the stories might just be a guy coming home from the pub one night, he reckons he's seen a ghost, no one else has ever reported the same thing. I'm not going to do those tonight. The stories that I am going to do, in my opinion, are far more likely to be genuine because there are multiple witnesses throughout a long stretch of time. The first story, as I explained, starts here, where that gentleman is now. See how you can arrange that? It's not him, by the way, just that.
Dragging the foot and rattling the chains.
I thought about it, but chains these days are far too expensive. Now, this actually involves a young man, and in the past people have been walking in that sort of area, and they have noticed what they described as a strange looking fella just over there. And when they notice him to begin with, he looks quite out of the ordinary because he's wearing this sort of long, dark cloak and one of these old-fashioned lace shirts, like with the frills around the neckline. And he's also got this long, dark hair tied back with a ribbon. So he's quite dated, and he's the sort of guy that you're going to notice. I'm not being flippant, but I'm a Penzance boy. I've been brought up in this town. I wouldn't dare walk around like that, mate. Not. Now, what I'm saying here is he's the sort of guy you're going to notice without a doubt, and people do. And often they just, maybe staring for a moment or two, and then carry on. They start walking up towards the incline part of Abbey Street. And maybe they've gone a bit further on, roughly towards where the light is. And then, all of a sudden, they realise that this guy is following them. Just a few paces behind, he's following them up the street. Now, it's been known for some people at this stage to just quicken their pace somewhat, just to try and get away. Only to find that he does exactly the same thing. And if they then do the opposite and maybe just slow it up a little bit, hoping that he's going to go past, oh no, he keeps an equal distance behind. So a lot of people by that stage are feeling unnerved, you know, wondering what the hell he's doing. In fact, it has been known for people to turn to the person that they're with and say something on the lines of, "Why is this weirdo following us?" Turn back, and he's gone. And everyone seems to suggest that this happens about a third of the way up the hill where that person is now. She's going to go wrong at some point. If I genuinely tried to do something like that, you couldn't get anywhere near it, could you? Although actually, maybe the joke's on me. These are all ghosts, and they're all we'll show it. But never know. What did he say? So, as about a third of the way up, so even from here, you can probably tell, but if not, we're going up there so you can have a good look. There's a blooming great wall on the right hand side, and equally there's a wall with a blooming great drop on the left. So what I'm hinting at is, there's nowhere for it to go. And people are shocked, they're amused, they can't explain it. Now that's just the first part of the story. I'm going to do the rest when we get there and maybe explain exactly where he disappears and maybe even offer a little bit of a suggestion as to who he might have been. One health and safety thing, and it's glaringly obvious, but I've got to say it just in case. As we go through here, the railings run out, so unless you want to get wet, make sure you don't go too close to the left hand side.
I don't want to go wet. Do you want to go wet?
Focused that I'm really oblivious to what's going on around me. So generally, if I'm in the middle of this story and a car is heading towards me and you think this silly swine is a motorist, please God tell me. And if you're thinking, well, to be honest, I don't like the look of you, mate, I don't really want it. Just remember, if I get run over, you don't get the rest of the tour. This is Abbey Street itself. Most locals call it Abbey Slip. And the first story that I've already mentioned, the guy with the long hair and the fully shirt. The place where he's said to disappear is about here. So again, wall, not obvious for him to go. You know, if he was right by the gate, well, that would be the explanation. As for who he was, assuming that he is a ghost, of course, we might have one possibility. And I can tell you now, the research of the history of the street, the only thing that comes close, but it is a little bit of speculation. But in the past, well over 150 years ago, there was an accident on that part of the street. And it involved a coach and horses coming up the old road here. And when it got to there, unfortunately one of the wheels came off and the carriage overturned. And as a result of that accident, one person died. Now, history tells us, firstly, that it was a young man. Unfortunately, it's not convenient enough to describe a young man with long black hair, a cloak and a pretty shirt, or anything like that. The second thing that makes this interesting, it wasn't a passenger on the coach itself. It was a passerby. It's the right place where the accident happened, is where this figure is seen to disappear. The fact that he's walking from over there and it's here that he disappears, one possibility is maybe that's where he walked over 150 years ago and that's where he died. Maybe that's why he would vanish. So that is the first story. The second story here in Abbey Street is in many, many ways your classic ghost story. Firstly, it's the White Lady, and I'm sure you've all heard of one of those before. And secondly, no. You can find that out in just a moment. But what is seen is a lady in a long flowing white dress, very old fashioned, appears at the top, and slowly walks down the hill to about here. And then witnesses who are normally further down see her turn and start to walk this way. So she'd go to where you are now. And the second reason I call this classic ghost story is because witnesses describe that when she gets there, she goes straight through the wall. Now, the problem with classic, the flip side of that is cliched. You know, you might think, oh, come off it, a white lady walking through a wall, that's just a little bit too convenient. And I would be inclined to agree, apart from one thing. These sightings have been going on for quite a few years, but only recently something happened to make the story more credible. The local council unveiled quite a number of old building plans relating to different places in the town, including one, an old sort of farms, also points to a small manor house, which used to stand just above here.
Thank you.
What these plans revealed was that there were cellars underneath. But here's the fascinating part. Plans actually showed there was a doorway right there to the cellars. No one had known this, or at least not in recent memory. So of all the places that people could come up with a lady walking through a wall, suddenly we had a little bit of historical backing. And as I say, the sightings have predated this for many years. We may never know who she is. We know why she walks that way. That was the doorway of the past. And then we have the third and final story from here. And this is probably the most famous one. Always, as far as I am aware, always seen after dark. So we're okay tonight, you know, we're at the right time. And it's a group of 4 men who are seen at the top of the hill and again slowly walking down. But they're peculiar to see because all 4 of them have these kind of long bushy beards and clothes, seafarers' clothes, but like something out of the 18th century. They've also got these sort of classic tricorn hats and 3-pointed hats. And also the 4 of them are undoubtedly together because they're carrying something between them. They're a corner each of what is described as a crate or maybe a box of some kind. And it's heavy because everyone says they struggle with this as they slowly walk down the hill. Maybe stood further down, watching these guys approach, maybe even planning on asking them what the heck they're up to. They never get the chance because these men may take a few steps further forwards, but then all of a sudden in front of their very eyes, they're gone, vanished into thin air. So it's a shock for people. People are genuinely scared, and suddenly they start to think that they've been dealing with a ghost, or should I say ghosts. There have been sightings of this going back decades. I'd say on average every 2 or 3 years, we hear of another one of these. And the overwhelming majority of people who describe this, as for who they are, I think the most likely type of person would be smugglers. One, yes, the way they're dressed, you know, seafarers' clothes, 18th century classic time for smuggling, carrying a big crate of all things, but also the fact that it's under the cover of darkness. You know, if you're up to no good, always better to do it when it's dark. They're coming from the area up there where a lot of the buildings at the top of Abbey Street and into Chapel Street, which run parallel to the top of here, have proven historical links to smuggling, to the point where they have, you know, during building work, found smugglers' tunnels and old oak casks. And they're heading down here, which is also interesting because before the bridge was built, boats and ships would have moored up along here as well. It was kind of a key. So add all that in together, and a lot of the reports from history tell how the smugglers brought the stuff in through the tunnels and then often distributed it from this area through the boats around to different parts of the area beyond. I think if we are dealing with ghosts, smugglers would be our most likely explanation. The one part I haven't yet mentioned is, I did say this happens after dark, but I didn't say probably a little bit later. So that might mean you have to come back. Hopefully when there's less cars, it'll be quieter, it'll be lonelier. Assuming you don't all come back at the same time. You might just be them for yourselves, because it is relatively regular. There's actually a lot of cases, genuinely, of people who've turned up in one of the pubs at the top of here in absolute panic, you know. When we get to the very top of the street, I don't mean them, the very top, on the corner is a large white building called the Admiral Benbow. And it's got a big plaque on the side, so you can't miss it. And it is a local pub, but don't get too excited because we're not going inside. But as we go past that pub, have a look at the roof. We'll see a figure lying on the roof with a hat and a gun. And when I say figure, it's a model, not an actual person. But this is actually in testament to some of the history of the pub. Because at the beginning of the 18th century, there was a notorious band of smugglers operating from that very building, who eventually got caught. And although the revenue officers managed to arrest all of them, apart from one, this one guy called Octavius Lanyon, of all things, ended up on the roof. And it's reported that he pitched his own version of Custer's Last Stand. So he was up there firing at them, you know, and they were firing back, because he had nothing to lose, because, you know, smuggling back then, you're probably going to get hung. But eventually, he was shot, he rolled off the roof, and survived. But it didn't do him a lot of good, because they hung him 7 days later. There is a tentative ghost link as well, because there are some claims that the guy that looks exactly like him also haunts the Admiral Benbow pub. Now, you might immediately think, well, that's a bit dubious, because everyone who's gone in there must have seen the figure on the roof, and then they're, you know, describing exactly the same thing. That's the one thing that makes this more interesting, because sightings predate the figure on the roof. Part of the reason they've modelled the figure as they have is based on the eyewitness descriptions. The pub is also supposed to be haunted by Annabelle, a lady who at the end of the 18th century lost her love as a sailor. He died out at sea, and she is said to have died of a broken heart. And indeed there have been reports in one of the windows in the side of the building, the face of a young woman staring out, tears rolling down her cheeks. If anyone goes into the pub and asks, you know, is that woman all right? There is, of course, no one there. What I won't do yet is tell you which window, just in case. You can tell me should you see her afterwards, because then I'll know you definitely did.
Oh, yeah, I thought it might be. And then when the camera goes to choose it, me. Oh, see, back in there. Finally, I got my pirate jacket on.
Here's the floor. Blind people.
Not blind people from behind.
Right, so if you haven't already noticed, I know you have. Hello. We are in a churchyard, or indeed graveyard, and it's actually called St Mary's Churchyard. And it is an old place. There's been no burials for over 100 years. A lot of history within its walls. Now, there were a lot of burials here in the year 1832, and that is because of a big outbreak of cholera in the area. And unfortunately people died, and the town were worried because they genuinely thought this is going to be an epidemic, we're going to run out of room. And they decided to build a mass grave, or as they called it, a cholera pit. Cholera pit, I think sounds awful. Stretching down all the way to the bushes there at the bottom, they are the cholera graves. Well over 60 people interred underground, including the gravedigger. As fate would have it, the guy that dug this thing had cholera and ended up being buried here as well. So the old expression, digging your own grave, falls you true for him. But whether that's relevant or not to the story, some say it might be him, others say it's unlikely. But as soon as this was placed here, a ghost story erupted. Now, I just need to clarify by saying there had never been one in here before that. All sorts of people saying how they'd been walking through here, often just after dark, and they'd seen a ghostly figure, tall, sinister, all in white, on the Collow graves. Some even claim that the figure seemed to float above the ground. Others talked about these strange doleful noises, groaning sounds then. And there were all sorts of reports of people who apparently were convinced they'd seen a ghost and then went full pelt, screaming and running out of here, absolutely terrified. But it kept happening to the point where the town was abuzz. The story was like wildfire. Everybody was talking about the ghost of St Mary's. Which meant that a lot of people suddenly felt very anxious. In fact, there were quite a number of people who openly turned to people and said, I wouldn't go in there now, there's a ghost. But not one guy. One evening, a young man, a sailor in fact, coming home from the harbour, made his way along here, taking a shortcut. And as he approached this part of the path, he saw something at the corner of his eye. He turned and he looked, and lo and behold, there was a white figure on the Collow graves. Now we have to give this guy some absolute respect, because unlike many of the others who'd screamed and run out of there, he didn't. Oh no, he didn't. He actually turned and walked towards the figure in order to find out who it was. And as he approached, he probably got within a few paces, and by all accounts he looked up and he asked two questions. Who are you? The second one being, what are you doing? The figure allegedly replied, I'm a ghost. In answer to the second question, what are you doing? The figure allegedly replied, I'm haunting the churchyard. Now hang on just a second. I don't want to sound like an absolute skeptic with this, but that doesn't sound quite right. I mean, the idea of a ghost just openly admitting and saying, yeah, I'm a ghost, I'm haunting the churchyard, how'd you do it? It's just not right, it's not how it's done. At least I don't think so. And I think the sailor must have felt the same way, because despite standing, probably about this close to a self-confessed ghost, he didn't scream, he didn't run, he simply decided to find out. Now, he'd heard this idea, and you've all heard the same, I'm sure, that if you met a ghost, you went to try and touch one, well, your hand would go straight through. So he thought he'd give it a try. Only he didn't just settle for a bit of a, no. He thought the ultimate way to test this out either way would be to take a pace or two towards the ghost and punch as hard as he could. Didn't go through. In fact, it definitely connected with something solid, because what he connected with that night here in St Mary's churchyard was a local prankster. A guy dressed up in a white sheet. Now, I don't want to be cruel, but I think he kind of got what he deserved. And of course the sailor felt so. He actually knocked him out, by the way. And he was very pleased with himself. And he dined out on this for weeks. Everybody wanted to hear the gory details, and everyone wanted to hear what happened. But a lot of people felt a bit foolish, because they had been scared of coming here, telling people they were petrified of a ghost, and then they find out it was some prat in a white sheet. But as people began to venture through the churchyard once more, the story started again. Claims of people walking through and seeing, well, you know it by now, a tall, sinister white figure. So what was going on? Could this be the prankster? Hadn't learnt his lesson despite a good old smack in the face? No, I don't think it was, because by then people had learned who he was. And there on in, when most of the sightings had been reported, his whereabouts had been accounted for. So could it have been other pranksters, you know, hearing about this, jumping on the bandwagon, copying and so on? Let's do a couple of things. One, some still claim that it seemed to float above the ground. Was it imagination? Did it really? Some had heard what had happened with the sailor, so of course they got cocky, tried to do the same. Only some of them reported how this time it did go straight through. If that's the case, there must be one hell of a lot of pranksters around. But this story, it's gone on throughout the years, right up to modern times. Reports, letters, articles in the local paper, regular sightings, and some are relatively recent sightings. So something's going on, and maybe it is just a family tradition, passing the white sheep down the generations. Or then again, maybe it is haunted. And there are those that do believe it is. I know personally people who wouldn't dare walk through here late at night. But you don't get that choice, you're on a ghost walk.
What? There's some.
Just here we've got two headstones, and these are actually two young men who fortunately went down with their ship. They drowned when they both down in a storm, and because they'd always been very, very good friends, they were very side by side. That's the story that was told. But one of them, William, who's this guy here, when alive, said he had a monster strength. And what I mean by that is a dog, a pet dog. Two of them were very close, almost inseparable in many ways, and the dog would often go on the boat with him, but not on the boat today. Very, very clear and extraordinary thing happened, because every single day, his dog, the little spaniel, would be found sat on his master's breast. Like he knew, like he sensed it. Incredible, incredible story. And this carried on for years. You know, he usually be seen sat there all day, most days, and people got used to that. You know, people visiting loved ones' graves with treats and food and snacks. He was well looked after. But unfortunately, eventually the dog passed away. Nothing sinister, the dog died of old age, but people missed it. You know, they missed it. Yeah, the special effects on this walk cost us millions. Yeah, you shut now.
Get some shots from here.
To maybe highlight something, it doesn't always have to be a dark graveyard or spooky out of the way place for there to be a ghost story, because the next story is just about where those people are now. I'm going to take you over there because you're not going to see this. All known sightings of what I'm going to describe happen early in the morning, around about 6:30, 7 o'clock. In the past, people have been walking along either the pavement or the prom by the local place called bin. And they've noticed a guy stood by the wall there, a little wall, with a motorbike. And they see him there, and they sort of walk past thinking, why is he good on the pavement? Because that's where he is. And he's bugging them. They're only taking a couple of paces and they're still thinking, why has he got it on the... Oh, gone. And it's too quick. The bike wasn't even started up. There's no way they say he could have got out of sight. The word came down that we walked part off a moment ago. We're back 45-ish years ago. And one morning, a guy was riding down there on a motorbike. He got to the junction. And an eyewitness saw him, and I'm afraid that he clearly didn't look properly. And he pulled out right in front of the car. And he was hit, he came off the bike, he rolled, the bike skidded across the road. They ended up in almost a tangled heap over by where that bin is today. The eyewitness ran to him to see if he was alright. He was dead. Going back to the guy with the bike who is seen there in the morning. People take a varying amount of detail when they describe it. Some people say, as a guy with the bike, they're not attention really. Whereas others will describe a bit about the guy, maybe what he's wearing, inside, film, things like that, and especially things about the bike. One person actually remembered the registration. When the accident happened, there's a certain amount of detail that was put in the local papers. You know, a bit about the car, what happened, and so on. It took me a while, but I eventually tracked down the original accident report. It tells you a lot more. It tells you the time of the accident, 6:47 AM. It tells you make, model, colour and registration number of that bike. And here's the incredible thing. For whatever reason they remembered it, they all get it right. And I love this story, not because it's dramatic or exciting or over the top or anything like that, because it is so simple. And so...
It's fairly modern as well, because it's a motorbike rather than an old-fashioned bicycle.
And actually there's a few people who've described seeing it. Their first comment is, what I didn't get is how he kept that bike in such good nick. And when they say, what do you mean? Because that bike must have been like 40 odd years old, it looked brand new. So even things like that. So in the scheme of ghost stories, I think this is right up there in terms of credibility. So in other words, set me laugh much time. Just to mention the Dolphin Tavern, and in many ways it'd be quite remiss of me not to give it a quick mention, because it's always been described as the haunted pub, and it's often been a birthday silence. You know, it's one of those famous sort of places. Now, there's three main stories. One is as simple as a Victorian, or a barmaid in a Victorian set of clothes is seen naturally enough in the bar area, and she comes out from one side and then drifts across the bar to the other side. But it is claimed by a former manager, rather Bob, that a few years ago there were over 20 people in the pub one night when she made his appearance, and allegedly every single one of them saw her exactly the same time. 20 plus witnesses. That's the sort of story we need. The second story is down in the cellars, and it's reported to be a young man in his early 20s who died sometime back, probably over 200 years ago. And basically he was drunk one night, he went to go down into the cellar, tripped on the stairs, stumbled down, broke his neck and died. But he was described in a very striking thing. Even though he was only in his early 20s, he had white hair. So in many ways, a little bit like myself, you know, early 20s, going There's been a lot of people at different times and so on. And there's a claim that quite a few of them, especially when they're new, at some stage been asked to go down in the cellar as part of their job, on their own, maybe change a foul or whatever. And then a few minutes later come hurtling back up the stairs, absolutely full of it, shouting, "There's someone in the cellar! There's someone in the cellar!" Now, this is usually as they come out the door, and there's only one way in or out. Then some people go back down there with them to check this out. There's no one there. And when they're asked, well, who exactly did you think you saw? Well, he was a guy, I say, what, early 20s, but he had like white hair. It's the one that's always in the books and stuff like that. And it's an old sea captain called George. Now, I think that's a nickname rather than a genuine thing. And he's described very much like, do you remember the guys on the hill with the tricorn hats and the beards? Very much like that, but probably more formal, you know, grand, like sea captain after all. And there's been cases where people have gone to go into the pub, end up at the bar, and you know, maybe they've gone up and said, oh, can I have a pint of Guinness please mate, white wine and a Coke. And can I just say, the guy in the costume looks brilliant. Have you got like a theme on you tonight? The guy in the costume. Yeah, on the way in, there's a guy in like in the hat and oh, you've met George. Well, I've no idea what he's called, but he looked great. I must. No, you don't understand me, sir. You've met our ghost. Your ghost, get up, he's right, aren't you? No. Now, I must admit, a couple of years ago, it was about 2 years ago, it's on the walk. So at this point, immediately before I took the story, I've seen the ghost in there, blah, blah. Now, don't get me wrong, but you never know with people, and I don't dismiss anyone, but you just don't know, quite frankly. And it's such a famous story. I had to ask a question. Do you remember exactly where it was? He got it right. So either he was in the know or he had seen it. I did actually, a few years ago, we were lucky enough to be invited in all night, no alcohol, I hasten to add, but to do an investigation. And not a huge amount happened, but there was one point, we were downstairs and everyone else had already gone, apart from the manager, and we all could hear footsteps like someone was walking across upstairs. And we were told no one was in there, and I thought, no. So I went up and found Bob in his office and went, right, go on, you've got something about to jump out or whatever. Go and have a look. There was absolutely no one up there. It was very, very clear someone was stomping across the floor up and down. There are people who will turn and say, I am never coming to this harbour ever again. But it's a story that actually refers to a black dog. It's meant to be a harbinger of doom, a portentous creature that appears to predict death. In other words, if you see this dog, you've had it. And no one else would see it, that's the idea. Now, there are more famous examples of this sort of black dog legend throughout the country, in fact, other countries as well. Hound of the Baskervilles is a classic example based on one of these stories, but they're often described as these hellish hounds, almost, blood-curdling and often glowing red eyes, and all very, very, fantastical. Not here. The black dog legend of Penzance Harbour describes a dog that you wouldn't suspect a thing if you saw it. You'd think it was a stray or a dog off the lead, about the size of a small black Labrador. I'm not saying it's no breed. But it's to appear just before someone died. The earliest story relating to this legend I've been able to find is actually over 200 years ago. The first story goes back just over 40 years ago. And one afternoon there was a ship, happened to be a French ship, moored here at the harbour. And one of the crew was stood at the side of the boat doing some work in the afternoon when he noticed a black dog just wandering up towards him. Now unfortunately this guy had a phobia of dogs, so as soon as he saw this black dog, he sort of stopped what he was doing, jumped up onto the ship just to get away. And several of the other crew who were stood up on the deck, wondered what the hell was the matter with the guy. Especially when he stood up there and he was pointing and getting all excitable and gesticulating, and they just looked at him in complete amazement because he was talking about this dog, pointing at it. They couldn't see a thing. Now I'm assuming they had no idea of the legend here at Harbour, but others do, as I'll come back to in a moment. But ultimately, a bit later on, this guy started to feel a bit unwell. In fact, where he went for a lie down in his cabin. But when he hadn't resurfaced quite some time later, one of the other guys went to check on him to find that he was in serious condition. He was seriously ill. To the point that they immediately called for an ambulance, which came to the harbour and took him off to West Cornwall, a hospital on the outskirts of the town. He died later that night. And when this little bit of snippet came out that he'd seen a black dog, Well, this legend had been around for decades. This place had erupted with claims that the black dog had struck them again. A few years later, we had a local fishing boat this time. Late afternoon, they'd come in with a big catch, took it to Newton Market, got a lot of payment for it. Decided they were going to go out again early the next morning to make the most of the good fishing. So they sleep in the boat just to make it easy. And just before they retired, all of them except the skipper went off over to the Dolphin to have a beer. And the skipper actually said to them, "Look, I'm not being funny, lads, but I know what you're like. We have got to get up early, so keep it sensible, yeah?" So they went off. And whatever they planned, in the end, the pint soon turned to tea. To free. Just after closing time, they all came, staggering out of the pub, heading back towards the ship. And as they approached the ship, they almost got to it, the skipper appeared over the deck, and they all tensed because they were expecting to be rollicking for this. No, the skipper looked at them, and the first thing he said was, "All right, lads, have you seen a dog?" Earlier on, he'd been on the ship on his own when suddenly out of nowhere this black dog had appeared on the ship. And so he'd stayed all night, and he'd left him alone, he hadn't trusted him anything. And apparently, he had actually been looking at this dog, thinking in his own mind that I really ought to get him off the ship because the lads were back. And he heard them coming up, literally towards the ship. And his head had jerked in that direction, the noise. By the time he looked back, the dog had gone. The skipper was convinced there's no way they could have missed it. They checked the ship, he wasn't on there. He said he would have had to have passed you must have seen it. They had seen nothing. But the next morning, bright and early, despite the protests, they took the ship out. A few miles out to sea, cast the nets, to do some fishing. But in the end, they found themselves in the middle of a storm. They were in serious trouble. And eventually, the storm passed, the seas became relatively calm, and that boat had got through relatively unscathed. And the crew immediately started to gather on deck, just relieved to be alive. And their happiness of getting through this safely was cut short almost straight away. Because it only took a matter of moments to realise one of them was missing. Later it was assumed that during the storm he had been swept overboard, and they were all focused on trying to keep the ship safe. Swept overboard and drowned. And do I really need to tell you who that was? The skipper. Maybe just superstitious nonsense. Let's do a third. One morning, two fishermen coming down towards the ship, running late to work, and one of them strode off ahead, and when he got up to the ship, he just turned to see where his mate was, and the other guy was stood down here, and apparently it was like he was looking at something on the floor, and the guy on the ship sort of shouted down to him, "Come on mate, what are you doing? Come on!" And the other guy apparently shouted back, "Sorry mate, sorry, I'm coming, I just stopped to look at this dog a minute." The guy on the ship nearly choked because there was nothing there, and he was not in the mood to be mucked about. So at this stage, he shouted down to him. Now I've got to maybe paraphrase this slightly, okay? It was something like, oh, golly gosh, that does sound awfully exciting, old chap. But if you would now be so kind as to leave the canine in question and join me on the boat, my good man, it would be awfully appreciated. He just started getting ready, and he started lifting some of the ropes and, just getting ready to take the ship out. And then he turned to see if maybe he was on his way. And as he said later, I saw what was going to happen. I went and shouted, I was too late. The guy who'd apparently been looking at the dog was almost at the ship, but he was looking behind him. And I'm afraid that when the guy on the boat had pulled some of the ropes up, the ship had just started to drift down, the gangplank had come down, but this guy hadn't seen it. And he went and shouted when he was too late. He stumbled over the edge, and then a wave hit the boat. Just crushed him to death. About 6 years ago, one afternoon, a gentleman was walking past the harbour with his wife and daughter. And as he was going past, he turned to them, I guess a kind of matter-of-fact kind of a way. He just sort of went, oh, look at that stray dog running around, look, on the harbour, look. Where's that dad? Over there, look, it's like a black dog, but there's no one with it, look. Where? There! They couldn't see it. They eventually, I know where they ended up, in Chapel Street. Now, if you're not familiar where Chapel Street is, you were very briefly in it tonight. Top of Abbey Street, where the gallery store is, the road that we crossed that comes down, that's Chapel Street. And they were walking up there, and the gentleman was a little bit further ahead of them, and his wife and daughter said that he just stopped almost in mid-tracks and fell to the ground. He was dead before they even got to him. What later was said to have been a massive coronary heart attack. And that's how this story has been throughout years. Some stories you think, come on, others just seem a little bit too real. But I don't know. You know, I will always be honest, and I will tell you now, I'm not even sure I believe this one. You know, I just don't know. The idea that a black dog is going to appear just to tell you you're going to die. Some of you will be stood there now thinking, will you shut up? I want to go from this darn place. But with this one, those of you who aren't sceptical, you know, I'm assuming that you'll have no problem in coming back to the harbour. And maybe in the future you will be walking around here, and maybe you'll see a black dog. But you're a skeptic, so you know, it won't bother you. You know, I assume you'll just turn to whoever you're with, and you know, if they know the story as well, you'll probably just jokingly say, "Can you see the black dog?" Yeah. And then, depending on their humour, they'll probably go, "No." You know? But ultimately, you know that it is a real dog. But what if? Let's rewind that scenario just a little tad. And you're here one afternoon and you're strolling around, and you know, black dog appears, and you turn and you say, "You see the plane?" Only this time, they say no, but with conviction, and you know them well enough that they actually mean it. You mean no? But really? And then you know, maybe you just ask someone else. So I'm not being funny. Can you see that dog there? And they say no with conviction. And then you grab hold of the nearest random stranger by the throat and say, "Can you see that dog?" And they say no as they slowly back away. Imagine, because well, you're a skeptic, aren't you? So it's all fine. All I can say is, by God, I hope you're right.
That is awesome.
Oh my God, he moved. Oh.
Jesus.